Welcome back to Theology for the Unwanted podcast. I'm Dan Tilson, your Catholic guru, and over there we've got John Byram.
What's up?
This is a special episode. We're finally doing that convert episode that we had been talking about. And
You're outnumbered today also.
I'm outnumbered because we have a special guest. We've got Jeremy from A Catholic Dad on TikTok. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, guys. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure. And I should mention you're also on Instagram, just slightly different. It's A Catholic Dad. So the emphasis is really on the Catholic there. Jeremy, why don't you tell us what got you into Catholic TikTok?
Well, I have a teacher account, and I did a couple of episodes about my Catholic faith, and those really took off, and I realized that there is a desire to share my Catholic faith. Since I live in the South, that's not always something easy to do, so this new medium, TikTok, gave me that avenue to share my side of things, since I am sort of an evangelical Catholic, which some cradle Catholics are not fond of, but I do see a calling to share the Catholic faith where some might not exactly think that sharing it is the best thing to do.
I think that's really cool because I found you on TikTok. I'm not on convert TikTok. I'm probably on the cradle side of TikTok, but stumbled across some of your videos. And at first I remember feeling like a little bit of a tension, like, ooh, I don't like the way that he worded that. And then the more I watched, I was like, he presents this in a very beautiful way. And so I thought it was really important to bring you on here for this. Of course, glad to have you. And John Byram, of course, you and I have known each other since college, which is when you converted to the faith.
I did. I was that weird college convert.
Yes. Well, you had a pretty large class of fellow weird converts, I guess you could say. So at this point, I'm really feeling outnumbered. Well, John, I don't know if we had talked about this, but when we were first getting this podcast set up, there were a lot of people that were pushing me to call this project Theology for the Marginalized. Or some folks said you should do theology for Catholics on the margins. It makes more sense. I said I wasn't so convinced about that because marginalized, in many ways, it's a political term. You have, if somebody says I'm marginalized, which by the way is never something I have heard. No one has ever described themselves as marginalized, at least to me. But if you say I'm marginalized, you're asking for a political solution. You're asking for some sort of recognition of rights. That's not what we're going for here. To me, the word unwanted, it's a deeply theological insight to recognize that God sees you in one way, and either you can't see that for yourself, or you're upset that others don't recognize your full dignity the way that God sees you. And that's really the mission for our listeners here, which is no matter what it is that you're experiencing, we want to make sure that you have the tools to start seeing, not with political eyes, not with powerful eyes, but with the eyes of God, who obviously loves you greatly. So this is an interesting episode for me because I think I get to take a break from a lot of the talking, and I'm probably going to learn. And I'm terrified I'm going to be in the hot seat.
I won't do that to you. I mean, I look, believe it or not, us converts, we are friendly, even though, you guys tend to have a very high standard of us, being cradle Catholics, that is. But no, I think you will learn a little bit from our conversion stories and our experiences. And I think our listeners may get a better understanding, or at least another perspective from converts here in regards to how at least two of us view the faith and how we came about to it.
Definitely. And I'm always curious, what would make somebody want to convert in 2025? Like what is the draw to the Catholic faith? There's a lot of people. The great news is that it's not just an American phenomenon where you see the baptisms going up. You saw the great numbers coming in at Easter, but it was also something we saw in Belgium, which we maybe dismissed a few years ago as a post-Christian nation, but it's on the rise there. Jeremy, what brought you into the faith?
Well, it was actually my brother and sister-in-law. They had converted before I did, and they were given my wife at the time. Well, she's still my wife. They were giving her material and things to listen to. And we would drive up there. It was about a 12-hour drive up to Illinois, and we would listen to we would listen to these CDs. And there was something about what they were saying that was completely different than what I had grown up hearing, that Catholics were evil and they were idol worshipers and they were, I even heard some people say they were Satanists. I heard a lot of these different things, and hearing an actual Catholic talk about it was very different. I still didn't really have any good feelings about joining necessarily. And so my wife and I attended an RCIA class, and I told her, if there's anything in that class that I do not believe is scriptural, I'm out. And she agreed. And here I am today, a Catholic. So that tells you that I obviously felt that everything that they were talking about was foundationally scriptural.
And it's almost jarring too to hear someone say that, they heard that Catholics were Satanists, because really we just like to go to the bar on Sundays. And it's so, John Byram, what brought you in?
Oh, well, it's funny. I do have to ask Jeremy, were those CDs, those Lighthouse Catholic CDs?
I honestly don't remember. I think that one of them that my wife got, it was about, and I don't know if this is going to be something that might offend people that are listening. It was actually a CD about contraceptions and the fact that the Catholic Church is against using contraceptions to not have children. And something about that CD started kind of turning wheels for my wife, and I listened to it and I was like, oh, this is pretty interesting. And then I don't remember exactly who made the CDs, but I do know that they were, I think Brant Petrie was maybe one of them. I don't know if y'all know who that is. And I think one of them was also Scott Hahn. So a couple of those. Yeah.
I do know Scott Hahn. I do love reading his books.
Yeah, his books are great.
Covenant Theology.
I'm glad you brought up Scott Hahn, because he played a massive role in my conversion also, because he had that one book. Oh, I'm blanking on the book's name. But
is it The Four Witnesses?
No, I'm going to Google this real quick.
Rome Sweet Home.
Rome
Yes.
Sweet Home. It was, to me, conversion to the Catholic faith. When you start, for me at least, when I started thinking about it, it was a little scary. It's because you have all those preconceived notions, like you listed. They're idol worshipers. They have statues. And I'm not going to say all Protestant denominations have a very negative view on the Catholic Church, but there does feel like there is some tension there. So when you grow up Protestant, you definitely have kind of that altered view of what the Catholic Church is. And then when all of a sudden you're starting to think about you're going to convert, or you're thinking about even just the Catholic Church in general, you have that uh-oh moment. And I think Scott Hahn really hits it in Rome Sweet Home for converts, as he is a convert also. I believe if I remember correctly, he was actually a minister in his churches, in his denomination.
Yes.
And then he converted, which is like even the biggest betrayal in those eyes. But no, like my conversion, and I'm very open about my conversion story. And, I'm a big believer in being open about mental health and everything like that. So with mine, it really started in 2012 in college. I was going through a difficult period in life. I had a episode of depression that lasted for a very long time, that was really clouding my judgment. And it was something that I had to work through. And part of that was my struggle with my faith. And I started reading books. I started reading about every denomination. I started reading about even like Far East religions, Buddhism being one of them, and just trying to find something that felt like home, something that made sense to me, because I had a lot of questions and not a lot of answers. And I remember I came across several books on the Catholic Church that just, one, the cover art caught my eye. And then I was like, oh, this is a Catholic book. I don't think I should be reading this, because if my parents find out, they're not going to help me with college anymore. So I started reading those books, and a lot of the stuff started making sense. And I started listening to those Lighthouse Media CDs that had a lot of good stories and good explanations on Catholic theology. And then I remember one of the weirdest things, and I'm directing this to all Catholics out there, this actually does work because it worked on me. Inviting someone to go to Mass with you actually does work. That's what happened with me. I started a new part-time job in college. I was introducing myself to the new staff, and one of the new staff members came up to me, and I kid you not, he introduced himself he goes, "Hi, I'm JD. I'm Catholic. Would you like to come to Mass with me?"
Not the vice president, for the record.
No, this 2012. 2012. So it was, I dismissed it at the time because I thought it was the weirdest way you could possibly introduce yourself to someone that you don't know, let alone your superior. But then I got to thinking about it, and I questioned him about it, why he introduced himself that way. He was like, "I just felt called to do it." He's now a good friend of mine. He was kind of my gateway into the Catholic Church. Him and his family, a very Catholic family, had I believe 7 children. Yeah, 7 kids. And his parents very open to answering my questions, giving me more information, and yeah, it just started to click. And hopped in RCIA and had most of my questions answered. And yeah, it was a wild journey that, looking back on it now, it's really hard to believe it's been 13. No, it was 12 years since I converted. That's
awesome.
A thing. It's been over a decade.
Wow.
Yeah.
So, Jeremy,
by the way, I was going to say just real quickly, I looked it up, and the CD, the contraception CD, is a Lighthouse Media CD.
Oh,
there we
fascinating.
Go.
Oh, well, I knew it wasn't VeggieTales. So, Jeremy, probably about 16, 17 years ago, I was not having a great time at my home parish, Catholic parish, obviously, and I took a risk. I decided to go somewhere else. And kind of like what you said, John, somebody invited me to try out the parish that I've been at ever since. I think at some point, I realized that this kind of was my spiritual home, and everything kind of fell into place. But I'm really interested, how does one know that they have found their spiritual home? Does it take years? Does it just kind of click right away? Do you have any insights on that, Jeremy?
Well, for me, it was when my wife and I were looking at Catholicism. It was actually the transfer from being a Baptist to a Presbyterian that kind of started me on this journey of not knowing what I thought I knew. The Presbyterians have very different things that they believe, different than Baptists. And that kind of started triggering this idea of maybe this isn't where I need to be. I don't really understand how you can say that you don't have the same belief in baptism or even in salvation, and yet you say that as long as you believe in the 5 solas, you're good. And that's kind of what actually pushed me to feeling like maybe there is something different. And it was that unity in Catholicism, the fact that there is no difference in, well, this church believes that baptism can be for infants, and then this parish believes that it's not. No, everybody believes the same thing. And it's also the fact that
Exactly.
if I were to go to a Catholic parish in any state or any country, I know what's going to be said and read. I'm not going to go to one church and have a Bible study on Romans and then another church and it be on Thessalonians or Matthew. It's all the same thing. And so there's this continuous, I told my wife, there's this continuous mass pretty much going on 24 hours a day. I would guarantee you that any hour of the day, somewhere in the world, whether it's a big cathedral or a tiny backwoods parish, mass is happening. And to me, that's a unity I love. There's no dissonance or there's no theological differences, since we have a governing body that can explain to us what it means. And we're not left to our own wiles or our own things, or even reading, well, this person says this is what the scripture means, and then no, this writer says this. We're not fighting. We're like, no, the magisterium says this, and I can trust their judgment because that's what they're there for.
John, I saw you nodding your head a lot. Is it the unity? Is that for you, John? Is that?
Yeah, I mean, when I discuss Catholicism with my Protestant friends, I hear their struggles, right? It feels like every other week you hear about another denomination infighting about what they want to believe or changing views or whatever they may be going through. And a good friend of mine grew up Lutheran, and I distinctly remember his family always talking about, well, if this ever happened to our church, I'm just going to find another Lutheran church to go to. And in my mind, I'm just like, well, that doesn't make any sense if it's the same denomination, wouldn't it be the same regardless of what church you go to? And the answer is an emphatic, it's not. It's not the same. Like, prime example, where I live, there's a Methodist church right up the street. There's another one 3 miles down the road to the east, and another one 4 miles down the road to the west. All three are vastly different from one another. They all talk about something different, and they all have a different message. They all went to the same seminary, if you will, and learned the same Methodist theology, but every Methodist church is different and has its own unique twist on how service is done. And that's the beautiful thing about the Catholic Church is, like, I was just over in Europe. I was able to go to mass in Florence, Italy. I don't speak Italian, so it was a little difficult, but I knew basically what was going on. I still knew what to do. I then went to mass in Germany. I went to mass in Belgium. I went to mass in the Czech Republic. It was all the same. You can't get that with Protestant denomination. It's really kind of a pick your own version for that. And that's something that really upset me even as a kid, going to a Presbyterian church and then moving and then going to a different Presbyterian church, and everything was vastly different. It was very frustrating.
Jeremy, in your opinion, do you think that unity, we definitely have unity. We don't always have complete and total uniformity, but to your point, John, that we are more or less the same everywhere you go. In some parts of Italy, you kneel, you stand during the Eucharistic prayer or during the consecration. Other places you sit. There's some small, tiny cultural differences, and to me, it seems like a big thing. To you, it sounds like it's almost uniformity. But Jeremy, do you think that unity, is there anything that we lose from that? Is there any loss of the message or the theology being able to speak to
that's a good
everyone
question.
that's in the pews?
I don't think so. But that's me being a convert, and as John said, having seen churches do different things. And I've been in churches where, for a Baptist, they can be charismatic sometimes, not full on, I guess, Pentecostal, or not handling snakes kind of thing, but they'll clap and they'll get up and they'll do that. But then when I was Presbyterian, they are, as my wife nicknames them, they're the frozen chosen. Like, they don't move. When you're in that pew, you don't move. I mean, I did a video about the Oran's posture and that we shouldn't do that. And man, people like came at me. There were a few people that said that the priest has his hands, I know they can't see this, but the priest have his hands kind of like facing in or facing out anyway, a different hands. But with Presbyterians, they don't even do that. They literally sit in the pew the entire time. And so I would dare say Presbyterians are more strict about liturgy sometimes than even Catholics are, because at least I've seen Catholics in my parish, they'll hold their hands up. But going back to uniformity, I don't think that there's necessarily anything missing, because for me, that unity, that not having to worry about one church is preaching this message and one is preaching that, to me, that uniformity is what actually drew me in. I got tired of constantly wondering, if I go to this church, like John was saying, this church is going to do something very different, and am I going to do something that is offensive to somebody? Whereas in a Catholic parish, I'm not worried about that. And in fact, since John kind of shared a story, I'll share one if I can. I'm not going to say what church, but there was a church in my area, a Baptist church, where a lot of the congregation left because the pastor mentioned something from a Calvinist perspective. And he mentioned something about an author that is a known Calvinist. He mentioned it, and from then on, people left because they thought that church was going to a Calvinist view. So a lot of your Protestant churches, people leave because of the pastor, or they go to a church because of a pastor. We had people in my hometown, the pastor of my Baptist church moved 200 miles away to another city to do another church, and people literally left my city and went to that city just to hear him preach. Which I don't think you're going to have any Catholic uproot themselves and move to a different city because a priest moves, or a priest is told to move somewhere else. So I think that unity, to me, I don't think there's anything lost, since the unity is allowing us to not be individuals, which sounds odd to say, but I think when we start making it about ourselves and we try to be individuals, we're taking away from who Mass is about. And so many people in the comments of my Orange posture were like, well, I'm going to do what I want. I'm going to do this anyway. And I'm like, yeah, and you're kind of being like a Protestant. That's what Protestants like to think of is if I'm not getting it out of worship, I'm going somewhere else. But I've heard so many Catholic media people say that worship's not about us. So I feel like the unity keeps us in that perspective of it's not about me, it's about Christ.
That's a fascinating point that you made there. I think that when we are re-examining what does virtue mean, what does vice mean, effectively in a relational setting, vice is really whenever we find a way to point religion or God or society or the setting inward and satisfying our own desires. And of course, virtue would be whenever we are pointing outward, but specifically pointing towards God. And so there is certainly some small degree to which different cultures are going to express the liturgy a little bit differently. I grew up going to the Novus Ordo in Latin. It wasn't necessarily by choice. I really, really enjoyed it, but that happened to be what my local parish was offering. It was a very traditional parish where everyone loved the Latin. And I came to love it too. And it's still very formational and foundational for my faith to this day. But then I go off to certain parts of like Italy or Switzerland and you find out that no, we have to stand during the Eucharistic prayer. How it's so funny in certain cultures, if you try and kneel during the Eucharistic prayer, they'll be like, oh, please stand up and respect the king, you know? And so that opened up my mind a little bit to realize that effectively, according to whatever our culture and really what our bishops and priests ask, we the people have to orient ourselves during the liturgy towards the divine. And there's, I mean, praying with your body and how you posture yourself, just like showing respect to your boss in a meeting by not slouching, they're pretty similar. So, oh, John, please, while we're at it, if I could ask my co-host to stop slouching over there.
Well done.
No. So, yeah, unity, uniformity, the liturgy is what I'm hearing from you, Jeremy. Was there anything else? I am often told actually that the Eucharist is not the first thing that draws Protestants to the Catholic faith. And I'm curious if that is true or not.
That was actually one of the first things that I stopped doing in my Protestant church when I was considering Catholicism. There's a scripture verse, and I can't remember it for the life of me, but I believe Paul is talking about if you don't discern the body, then you bring death or you bring
Exactly.
doom on yourself, judgment. And my mind was like, why would Paul mention that if it was just bread? And many Presbyterian or many Protestants will say, oh, when he says discerning the body, he's talking about the body, the church, the the invisible church. And my thinking is no, he's talking about the physical body of Jesus. And the fact that Protestants see it at the most they'll see is what is it? They think that there's like they exist at the same time, not was I think consubstantiation maybe where the body and the bread exist together, but I know Catholics believe it's transubstantiation where it's a complete takeover of that. And to me, that is really what actually drew me in because growing up as a Presbyterian and a Baptist, we would do communion or the Lord's Supper once every 2 or 3 months at best. I know at my Baptist church, you had it on special occasions like Easter or Christmas, but then other than that, they would pull out the special tables and the white cloths once every maybe 2 or 3 months. Whereas coming to a Catholic church, that was the first thing that really blew my mind is that over half of the mass is focused on the Eucharist. Whereas in a Protestant church, and not all Protestant churches, don't get me wrong. I know my wife played at one, and I think she played at an Episcopal church, and I think Episcopals have a pretty they focus a good bit on it, but not necessarily the same way as Catholics. But having come from a background where it was in some ways, and this is not trying to knock them, but you feel like sometimes it is an afterthought. It's like, okay, we're going to do it this week, and then we're not going to do it again for another 2 months. Whereas at a Catholic church, it's every day, multiple times a day, it's being offered. And actually, that was one of the first things that pulled me in, was that verse and re-seeing it for the first time of that really is the body. Paul would not make an emphasis on it if he was just talking about the church. He would have said, if you don't discern the church, or if you don't discern the invisible body, but he said the body of Christ, which to me was a clear sign that there's something more than what I grew up with as a Presbyterian and Baptist.
Yeah, and I definitely second that. My stint as a Protestant also, we would have the Lord's Supper like once a month. It was always like the first Sunday of the month, or if it was a major religious holiday like your Christmas, like your Easter. But other than that, it wasn't really the focus. And again, not knocking them also, but the main focus of most Protestant churches is the sermon, right? You go there, you sing a couple songs, you have your person that goes up there, gives an opening statement. Okay, after church we have a potluck, which I'm all for potlucks, but they do that, and then the minister comes up and talks a little bit about what the homilies or his sermon is going to be about, and then dives into it. And for the next 45 minutes, it is a sermon. And I always felt like, even as a kid, I was like, you've got to be kidding me. I've got to listen for 45 minutes, which again, I'm not trying to poke at the cradle Catholics here or anything, but when I hear cradle Catholics complain that the priest goes for like 5 minutes on his homily, to this day, I'm like, that is the shortest thing I've ever heard in my life. I love this. This is great. But, for me, 5 to 7 minutes, I think is a perfect time for a homily. As long as you keep it under 45 minutes, I'm set and I'm cool with it. Dan, just out of curiosity, are you okay with 5 to 7 minutes for a homily?
Well, it depends on what time brunch is.
Well, that's a valid point.
John, I'm going to direct the next question to you to start with. So I meet with folks every single week who have had bad experiences in the Catholic Church, and they will tell me they're divorced and remarried. Maybe they're having trouble conceiving a child, and they, sacramentally married, but they're feeling a little embarrassed about their situation. No one has ever asked to meet up with me and talk about feeling unwanted as a convert. And so I really need to start asking the question, are there ever any times where you feel unequal, or like people are staring at you, or was that something that you experienced at the beginning and it went away? What's that like?
So for the community that I joined in college, obviously it was a Catholic campus ministry. There, I did feel like I stood out, obviously, as a convert, because everyone knew I was a convert, right? So I had the internal pressure on me of, okay, like, for whatever reason, cradle Catholics love to think converts are like the best version of Catholic, and I don't understand where that comes from to this day. But that puts a lot of pressure. At least I felt that kind of pressure. I don't know if Jeremy, I don't know if you would agree with that statement. Did you feel any pressure after your initial conversion?
It was definitely interesting having cradle Catholics that I met after converting say that going through RCIA, I learned more about the Catholic faith than they knew as cradle Catholics. And it wasn't until I did social media that I actually saw that there was this, I guess you could say, divide in some ways between cradle Catholics and converts. Because where I am, the parishes I've been at, everybody's welcoming. I don't think people have I do not think people would know I was a convert unless I told them.
Yeah, and I think that's where I'm at today also. Is like, I can go to my parish and no one's going to be like, oh, he's a convert. Oh, he's acting a certain way, he must be a convert. But that initial, after Easter Vigil, that initial year, if you will, if you're still within that community, you do kind of have that stigma, right? And you have positive and negative stigmas. So you had that. And then to hear from cradle Catholics tell me the same thing that Jeremy just said is, you know more about the faith going through RCIA than I did in 12 years of Catholic school, blows my mind. And I think that's actually a discussion for something else later on down the road when it comes to Catholics and being in touch with their own faith and understanding of their own faith. But I think initially that there was that pressure, and I think that's really our first introduction to what cradle Catholics call Catholic guilt a little bit, where the community
I thought I was born with that.
Well, apparently converts get that also. But no, I think from my personal experience, the only negative moment I can really think of, and we discussed it last episode, was actually in the confessional. But other than that, for the most part, I haven't really had too many negative experiences, let's say in the community at the parish. I may not have liked certain things I saw, but I also understand that people are in their own place on their own faith journey. So, I do my best not to make judgments, just like I hope they're not making judgments about me. But at the end of the day, I'm there for a reason. I'm there to worship my God. I'm there to give all glory to him. And I'm there to try to learn a lesson to better myself and take that message out into the world and maybe be that person that helps bring someone else to the church.
When you look at Jesus's very first sermon, Luke chapter 4, verse 16 through 19, it's his first time returning to his home of Nazareth. And he is standing up in the synagogue and he unrolls the scroll and he tells the Jewish people that he is anointed because he has come to give sight to the blind, to free the prisoners. Essentially, what he is saying is that he is proclaiming a year of the Lord's favor, meaning we are opening this church up. And for his community in that time, when it was a colony of Rome, there was immense social and political risk, even risk of violence. And so, at least in his community, in his synagogue, they did not like the idea of having to open up the religion to others. And the response to Jesus' homily was they ran him down the hill. So, in a very human way, this plays out even today. I mean, you can find this all throughout the Old Testament, but today as well. And that theory, by the way, we call it mimetic theory, comes from Rene Girard, and Bishop Barron actually has a fantastic video summarizing what I just said and how it relates to philosophy. But in a very human way, we do not like opening up our very sure, very neat clubs. In this case, I'm talking about parishes, to people that have just shown up at the door and said, I would like to belong. Yet at the same time, the gospel tells us to do this. And so I am unsure of the ways that maybe, I don't know. Have I always been welcoming to converts? Are there any times where I've looked down on them? I don't know. And so what are some of the signs that parishes should be on the lookout for? And maybe Jeremy, if you have any thoughts on that.
I would say, coming from the Protestant background, since when John mentioned when he converted, I feel like I am a newer convert than he is. A lot of our upbringing comes with us, and a lot of things I've seen again on social media are how we converts try to bring how we grew up into the Catholic faith, and we're not trying to change it. Dan, you talk about Catholic guilt, and I don't know if many people ever have thought about this, but growing up as a Baptist, Baptists are very big on what we call witnessing to others.
Hmm.
When I was in youth, we would go to conferences, and half of the conference would be you and 3 or 4 other people, which I don't know if you would do nowadays, would go door to door and witness. And for me, there's this guilt coming from this idea that if you don't witness to people and you win them over to Christ, as they say, you're not doing a good job. And so there's kind of a guilt there. So sometimes we converts have this desire to share our faith because that's how we grew up doing it. I saw a comment on another video that stated that they said that Catholics are taught how to live it out, doing things to be sacrificial, whereas Protestants are taught more of how to go out and try to win people over. So a lot of times I think that one sign might be if there's a convert that's very vocal and tries to want to do things a little differently, a parish shouldn't just shut them down saying, we don't do that. Because that's a good sign of that person possibly leaving and going to another parish that will be more welcoming to new ideas, especially for a parish that might be suffering. I know many parishes will suffer people coming in and they haven't changed anything, and they're wondering, why aren't we bringing people in? And they're not changing anything. It's like trying to catch fish with the same bait. If the fish aren't biting that bait and you keep using it, that, I hate to say it's your own fault, but be open to new ideas, especially if someone who's a convert was on the other side and knows what draws them in. Let that person maybe find ways of doing that, because that is what's going to work.
Yeah, I mean, I 100% agree with everything you said as well, Jeremy. I think one of the things for me that I don't know why this bothers me so much, but when I hear Catholics talk bad about Protestants, for whatever, like it's like when I heard Protestants talk bad about Catholics, I wasn't really on board with it. But now that I'm Catholic, and when I hear people talk about their preconceived notions of certain denominations, and I know it's wrong from my lived experience, it really bothers me, right? If we're, we claim to be the universal truth, we talk about, or the universal church, and we want to bring people home, right? That word home, to me, home doesn't mean, chastising your children, right? It's not, it's welcoming and loving, not saying, oh, Tommy, you're a Lutheran, so I'm automatically going to assume you're going to be a troublemaker. Or, oh, Samantha, you're a Seventh-day Adventist. What are you doing out on a Saturday? Kind of thing. Like, I'm not going to, like, that's not what I'm looking for. Like, I don't want to hear that. I want to hear, I want to hear the positive messages. I want them to be open to the idea of even doing outreach with other denominations. Like, that's, to me, I think that's a bigger way to build the faith community in general. I mean, when you take a look at the Catholic Church, it's easily the largest charitable organization in the world. And then when you take a look at the US alone, what is the next largest church denomination that has a big outreach in their community? It's the Methodist Church. Not a lot of people know that. The Methodist Church is second to the Catholic Church. There's a lot that the Methodist Church agrees with the Catholic Church on when it comes to outreach to the poor, to the homeless, to the needy. And there's so much ability to work with those interfaith connections through our love and worship of our God, that we can go for the bigger picture. We can really live out our Christian calling together in that way. So, and I agree. So if you hear a convert give an idea or a suggestion that may come from that lived experience as a Protestant, don't automatically dismiss it. Discern it a little bit, break it down. Where is it coming from? Because I guarantee you 99.9% of the time, it's coming from a place of good faith, of wanting to see our parish grow, not just in numbers, but grow spiritually. There's nothing wrong with asking questions. I think as converts, that's one thing that we constantly did, was ask questions. I know in RCIA in college, we had one class dedicated to us asking our priest and faith ministers questions. And we were there for 5 hours and we were bombarding them with questions, and they were answering everything the best that they could.
There's a tendency, really just a human tendency, to look at how people who are like-minded with you are treated, and to want to defend the people that you like hanging out with, and to want to demonize the other. At some meetings I had in Rome a year ago, I was sitting down with one of the Vatican's advisors on interreligious dialogue with Muslims. And he said to me something really fascinating that stuck with me. He said, you can look at any split in the church, and you can look at any group that has left the church and gone off to found their own denomination, and there is always a social split that precedes it. He said people start to realize they don't like to hang out with Bob, and then they start to look for reasons why they disagree with Bob. And then, by the way, I shouldn't have used Bob because that's our new pope. But we'll give it a Larry. I think Larry is safer, right?
Poor Larry.
So people start to look for reasons why they disagree with Larry, and then the theological reason to confirm why they had to split, why they had to become separate groups, that comes a little bit later and then is fortified over time. There's also, I know that we get caught up in the politics of things. And even for bishops within the church, there's that tendency to want to impose your idea of Christianity. And of course, that's not correct, because theology is just reality. It's not, doesn't have politics. Theology doesn't have viewpoints on things. It just is what it is. And it's the greater reality, which is God himself. And we're trying to use our human words and our vocabulary, guided by sacred scripture and tradition, to explain how that relates in concrete ways to our own lives. And keeping that in mind, I remember Pope Francis 2 years ago, there were a number of individuals in the church that were saying, hey, tell so and so to stop talking about pro life every 5 seconds. And on the other hand, there were also people in the church that were saying, please tell this bishop to stop making everything about immigration. And in both cases, Pope Francis said, it seems like they're both really enthusiastic about something very Catholic, and they're bringing their own talents to the church in this way. And so, using a metaphor of St. Paul, we have to understand that all of us are given gifts. All of us have a perspective. The challenge is understanding that the person next to you doesn't have to see a social or maybe a political reality exactly the same. And that doesn't mean that we have to kick them out. So I think TikTok has made me realize that we probably do that with converts. I definitely, just like as a former Senate employee who would always look at the House representatives and go, oh, that's classic House behavior. And I have definitely heard a couple people say, like, oh, classic convert, like it's an insult. No, don't shut somebody up. And I really wish I could understand the core of why we do that, other than it's human nature. But I don't know, Jeremy, if you have any other insights on that. We only have about 10 minutes left here. But what is it that you would want all Catholics to know, to be on the lookout for, to be more welcoming to converts? What is it that you want converts to know too, so that they can help navigate any of these conflicts as they come up?
For me, I think the biggest issue, or the biggest thing I would say about converts, is to basically understand that the way that a Catholic might do something, especially someone who was raised Catholic, is very different than how, as a Protestant, I would have done it. You're talking about Catholic school, and I've had many comments of people that will say, I did this, or I was told to believe this by a nun at my church, or a nun at the school, or something else. Whereas Protestants, we're taught, oh, think for yourself. If you don't agree with it, go read another person. And a lot of converts like myself, we love reading scripture. That's kind of the biggest thing about being a Protestant, is read scripture. And in fact, this past weekend, the homily on Sunday, the priest even said, or excuse me, 2 weeks ago, the priest said that we as Catholics should read scripture. And there is material out there that is approved by the magisterium, by the church itself, of things that can help you to study the Bible, so that you're not reading it outside of what the church thinks. And I think that for a convert, we have to step back and realize that there is an actual authority that has a discernment to read scripture and to tell us what it is. And that if we don't agree with what our priest says, we can't just go and find a religious author and read it and say, well, hey, Father so-and-so, look what this guy said. He disagrees with you. Well, the priest has gone to training, and he has been ordained by the council or whoever to interpret scripture. So what he says has authority. It's kind of, when I do my videos, so many people will say, well, I'm gonna listen to my priest. And I'm like, fine, listen to him. I'm just sharing my opinion. And I think Protestants, that are converts, we have to step back and realize that there is an actual authority. And this isn't a situation of, well, I didn't like what this priest said, so I'm going to go to another parish where the priest is going to say something that I like. If we start doing that, we really are no better than, like John said, some of the Protestants that will do that. And I do want to share this anecdote I didn't get to share earlier. I actually heard of a church splitting because they couldn't agree if Jonah was swallowed by a big fish or a whale.
No,
Yes.
that's
I
losing
don't know
sight of
where
the
this
big
was,
picture.
but so that's why for Catholics, we cannot see a cradle Catholic and a convert as two different people. they are the same. They are the same. In fact, it's funny because we just had Pentecost, and if you go in Acts and you look at Pentecost, when Peter preached, he preached to Jews and Jewish converts. It even says he preached to Jews and Jewish converts, and they both came and joined the church. 3,000 of them joined the church. So we can't say, "Oh, I'm a cradle Catholic. I went through it," and that's something else I heard. A lot of cradle Catholics say, "Well, you didn't go through a time where you had a priest that betrayed the trust and did something that betrayed the trust, or the parish tried to sweep it under the rug." And you're right, I didn't. But you can't hold that against me. You can help me learn how you experienced it so that I don't brush it off. But at the same time, if I didn't experience it, you can't punish me for something I didn't experience. And I think that's something that both sides need to look at, is we can't take our upbringing and use that against each other. We have to see how we can work together. Like cradle Catholics can teach the converts, here's how to live to be a Catholic. And the converts can teach the cradle Catholics, okay, here's how you can witness. So you bring the living and the witnessing together. And now you've kind of got that, I'm not going to say super Catholic, but you got both sides coming together, benefiting each other.
Yeah, and that's, as I was watching your videos on TikTok, like I said, I had that initial reaction that made me realize that I didn't like being challenged. And that's precisely why I thought it's such a gift to have you on this episode. And John, I don't know if you have any closing thoughts to that.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a big challenger. I like to ask questions even to this day, and I don't have an issue going up to the priest after mass is over and asking questions. Like maybe I want a little bit more clarification on his homily. Maybe I want a little bit more clarification on how it's connected to the gospel or to the other readings, or really trying to figure out what he's trying to hit home at. I feel like sometimes when I do that, I get these side eyes. I get these people act like that I'm trying to hog the priest. But a lot of times I'll just go up to the priest and simply just say something along the lines of, hey, in your homily, you said X, Y, and Z. I'm really curious about what you said, and I want a little bit more clarification. Is now a good time to talk, or would it be okay if I scheduled a time to come and meet you in your office and kind of go over what you said? Because in all honesty, I'm very interested in what he's saying. I just want a deeper dive. And I know a lot of times priests don't want to go super deep in their homilies because they're trying to make it relatable for everyone. But in all honesty, I feel like not just because I was a convert and the reason I got here was because I was asking questions, but I feel like that's a way you can grow even deeper in your faith, is by continuing to ask those tough questions, especially as you continue your own life journey and you have other experiences and you try to find those answers from the Catholic Church. I think it's a good thing to ask those questions. I think it's a good thing to reach out to those faith leaders and be like, hey, this is what I experienced. I'm kind of confused on how I'm supposed to interpret what just happened, or I'm kind of questioning, X, Y, and Z. And I was wondering if there's something in our faith that I can look at for guidance. I think that's a great thing to do. And I really encourage people to really ask those tough questions. It's not embarrassing. And I can almost guarantee you your priest is going to be happy that, one, you were paying attention to his homily, and two, you're taking an interest in your faith. I think that's huge, is when you have those engaged conversations, you're showing you have that interest. You're showing that you're engaged. You're showing that you're willing to learn and grow deeper into your faith. So I think if you do see a convert that is asking questions on one side and just, I guarantee you the convert doesn't want to draw attention to themselves. At least they shouldn't be. The questions should be coming from a good place where they're trying to learn and continue to grow, because that's what we as converts have done, is try to grow in our faith. And in all reality, no convert wants to stand out. We don't want to stand out. Like, we want to be able to slide in the back pew just like everyone else does, come in 5 minutes late to mass and have no one see us. We want to be able to have that also. We don't want to be known as the people who are showing up 30 minutes early, taking that front pew and are acting all pious for show. No, I want to be able to slip in the back just like everyone else does, and just and be in the back view and be present with our God. So I just think, also I'll say this. I think a lot of converts are very open to sharing their conversion story. It is a deeply personal journey, but I think a lot of us are open. And I think that's a very powerful form of evangelization, not just outside of the church, but within our own church as well. Maybe we're the spark to telling, our story is a spark for someone who is in the Catholic faith, who may be doing a lot of questioning, may have a lot of self-doubt, may have a lot of doubt within the church, and they need that push, that rekindling of their faith. I think that's where us as converts can really step in and talk about our journey, our faith experience, and really help our community become more passionate, I believe the term that I absolutely hated when I was converting is be more on fire for the Lord. So I think that's a great thing that we as converts can do to kind of give back to our parish community for them welcoming us into their parish through Easter Vigil, through us receiving the sacraments for the first time, and supporting us through our conversion journey as well.
Absolutely. And Jeremy, as our guest, will give you the last word.
Well, and I want to say too, just the last thing I want to say about welcoming converts, you got to understand that many converts, when they come to the Catholic faith, they are leaving and in a lot of ways losing things. My wife and I, we lost a lot of friends. We lost a lot of people that we used to hang out with regularly. Now they don't even seem to act like we exist. Some of them even try to have us second guess ourselves. So if you push away a convert, not only have they lost their old friends and family and church body that they left to convert, you're now pushing them away from the new body that they want to become a part of. And so you're alienating them even more because now they have nowhere to go. And for my wife and I, we were so blessed to find a young Catholic group in our area that we clung to that helped us during that transition, because I fully believe that if we had not had them, it would have been a lot tougher for us. And especially when we converted in 2019. And what happened 4 or 5 months later? COVID. I couldn't even spend my first anniversary as a Catholic in church. I had to watch the Easter Mass from home. And that was horrible, being isolated and you're a new Catholic. So for anybody out there who knows a convert, understand that they probably left a lot to become a Catholic. And shunning them is just making it worse, because now they may not feel like they made the right decision, and they could go back to who they left, or they could go off somewhere else.
That's perfect. I mean, you brought it back to the gist of this entire podcast, which is feeling unwanted, whether that's from your old community, your new community. That is a deeply theological insight. And so normally at the end of episodes, we ask our listeners to find somebody they can share their story with. Tonight, Jeremy, I'm asking them if they can please go to TikTok and follow you at A Catholic Dad, and on Instagram at A Catholic Dad. And just kind of, I hope the listeners share their stories with you as they do on your channel already. But please give him your support, and we will be sure to keep you, Jeremy, as a close friend of this show, so we can continue to learn how to better serve the populations that you're ministering to. So thank you so much for being here tonight. It's been an honor to have you on.
I loved it. Thank you guys so much.